And now you have the people going from the wilderness into the promised land, crossing over on dry land through this river. And he keeps making these connections for us. He keeps showing us, hey, remember Passover? That's what I'm doing for Rahab. Hey, remember the Exodus? This is like a new Exodus that's taking place right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Renewal Bible in a Year podcast. My name is Pastor PJ Arsvold, and today is a big day because we are closing the door on the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, which is incredibly exciting. This is, again, such a central chunk. These first 5 books that you have read at this point form the nucleus that everything else is going to kind of grow out of. And so this week is the week that we finish up Deuteronomy and therefore finish up that Pentateuch. And not only that, we're going to get through the entire next book of the Bible. We're going to go through all of Joshua this week, and we're going to get into Judges. So we got a lot to talk about today, and I'm excited for that, but we are off and running. This promise, this quest that started the first week of reading to get to this promised land, well, today is the day we're finally going to read about getting there, and we're going to even get a little bit of a preview of what it looks like once the people get there. So that's what we're doing today, and I'm excited to dive in with you. So since we have so much in Joshua and even getting into Judges today, I'm going to keep Deuteronomy a little short, but you have one more day of reading in Deuteronomy, and at the end of chapter 31, where we just left off, we had Moses about to sing a song or teach the people a song that the Lord had revealed to him. And again, the purpose of this was to be a witness to them. So as they go about their lives in the promised land, they would have this song to remember the Lord and his deeds. And so chapter 32 is primarily the telling of that song. And again, this is a retelling of the story, a reminder of what God has done. God wants his people singing and remembering who they were, what God has done for them, what he's brought them through. And then as he closes out the section, Moses will tell them to take heart all these words by which I'm warning you today. So remember these things. And then he closes out by saying, for this is no empty word for you, but your very life. And by this word you shall live long in the land that you are going over the Jordan to possess. So again, this word is not meant to be harsh or hard. Don't disregard it because it's your life. You live by this word, it'll be good. It's true just of God's promise, the gospel of Jesus, right? If you live by this word, it'll be your life for you. And then Moses is told that he will die. The Lord tells Moses that his time has come. He's getting ready to close the chapter on Moses' life. So then in chapter 33, Moses is going to speak blessings over the people. And so he starts off with a general blessing over Israel, over the entire people. But then he's going to get more granular and he's going to go tribe by tribe, starting with Judah. So again, you go all the way back to Jacob's blessings. And I really want to highlight Jacob's blessings here because there's a lot of parallels here. At the end of Genesis, as we were closing out the story of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and so on, as we're closing out that chapter, Jacob leaves final blessings for the people. And now as Moses is closing out his chapter of his life, he's going to give final blessings as well. So starts off with Judah, and just as Jacob said that Judah would be this lion, this one with the scepter to kind of rule over, Judah was going to have this very important place. Judah is now the first one that Moses will bless as well. After Judah, he'll go through Levi and Benjamin and then Joseph, and he'll say things like, "Blessed by the Lord be his land with the choicest gifts of heaven, above and of the deep that crouches beneath." So again, you think back to what Joseph did in Genesis, and you're seeing that just as Jacob said that would result in great blessing for Joseph's descendants, Moses is reiterating that and re-blessing them. And just a reminder that the Joseph's family is the Manassites and the Ephraimites, or so Ephraim and Manasseh. Those are Joseph's household, that's his tribes. So you got blessings on those two, and then you go through the other brothers and so on. So you have all of these blessings that are being doled out, again, very much mirroring Jacob's blessings at the end of Genesis. And then you have a very short chapter to close out the book of Deuteronomy, and that's the death of Moses. And this is, if I'm being honest, this is one of those sections of the Bible that I get very emotional at. I get very sad reading because we've been with Moses for so long. And I just want you to take a moment to reflect, all that you've read about Moses. Now, Moses is not the Savior. He's not the Lord. He's not perfect. There's a reason he's not going into the promised land. But you think back at Moses interceding when the people broke faith and made the golden calf. You think of Korah's rebellion when people were challenging Moses' authority, or even when Aaron and Miriam challenged Moses' authority. And every time Moses interceded, he pleaded for their forgiveness and seemed at times to be the only faithful one. Now, surely he was not the only faithful one, but it felt that way. And so I'm really sad when you get to chapter 34 and the Lord takes him up on a mountain and he shows him the promised land. It's almost like he's being shown, hey, you brought him this far and do you want to see where I'm going to take him? And Moses looks over the promised land that he'll never get to step into in this life. And eventually when we get to the Gospels, we'll see Moses appear in that promised land. But for now, Moses looks over the promised land and then he dies. And we're told at the end of Deuteronomy that there is not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. We see that there's never been, up until Jesus, another prophet who spoke with the Lord face to face, who knew the Lord, who did the things that Moses did. And so Moses is an incredibly important and central figure. Again, he is not the Lord, he's not the Savior, but he was a servant of the Lord, and he did a pretty darn good job by God's grace. And so Deuteronomy closes with Moses dying and being buried and the people mourning, and then that leads us into the next chapter in Israel's history. So now Moses is stepping aside, right? He's died, and so now to lead the charge is Joshua. So we're told that Moses has been kind of raising up Joshua. Joshua is his assistant, and the book of Joshua is going to really span Joshua's life, and it's going to be the taking of the promised land. Often this is referred to as the conquest, right? The conquest of the Canaanites or the Canaan land or of the promised land. And I talked a couple episodes ago about violence, and I think if you need, I'd encourage you to go back and look at that again or listen to that. I'll just say this too, when we think of this conquest and we see what's going to take place in the book of Joshua, this is a one-time divinely mandated event. One thing I hope that you picked up on in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy was how much God cares for the non-Israelite, how much God cares for the foreigner. God is not creating a people that is meant to hate everybody who's different or from a different place. But in this one instance, God is commanding them to execute his judgment over these people. And we're going to see that play out. So again, as you go through the book of Joshua, I know that some parts are probably going to be a little hard or maybe take some wrestling. And actually, a book that I just picked up, I haven't had a chance to look at it a ton, but it came out recently. There's a book that came out called Wrestling with God, Understanding Difficult Old Testament Passages by Reed Lessing and Andrew Steinman. That's Steinmann. I encourage you to check that out if you want to wrestle with some of these things. There's a chapter on violence in the Old Testament. There's a chapter on God's vengeance and judgment in the Old Testament. There are other things too, like creation in 6 days or what to make of symbolic numbers. Again, I haven't read it all yet, and so I can't vouch for everything, but seems like a really helpful resource. So if that's a topic or any of those are topics that you want to dive more into, I encourage you to check that out. I'll probably put a link in the description too if you want to check out that book. But as we move into Joshua, then this is the moving into the promised land, the conquest. Moses is out of the picture. Joshua's taken over. So the book of Joshua opens up with the Lord telling Joshua, right? Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all the people. So now the Lord is saying, I am going to use you. You are now the one to go. So within 3 days, you're going to be over the Jordan. So this is happening. Time's up. So then the book of Joshua opens up with the Lord speaking to Joshua and telling him, right? So Moses is dead. So now it's time for you to lead the people over into the promised land. And, it's going to be within 3 days, you're going to be over the Jordan. This very well-known line, be strong and courageous. I'm with you. Do not let these words of the book of the law depart from your mouth. So you should meditate on them. If you remember my commands, my promises, I'm going to be with you. Things are going to go well. And you have the people who are saying, yes, we'll do what you say, Joshua. You lead us in the Lord's name. and they are ready to obey, and they are ready to go into the promised land. In chapter 2, then, we're going to start the first unfolding of all this. So the people have not crossed over into the promised land yet, but they're going to send spies over. One thing I want you to notice as we get into the book of Joshua is there's going to be lots of parallels to previous events in the history of God and his people. And so if you remember back in Numbers, we got to the promised land, and what did they do? They sent spies. They brought back a bad report, and then the people were afraid. Well, now they're at the precipice of the promised land. They're ready to go in, and they send spies in to go check out the promised land, and they especially look at the city of Jericho, which is kind of right across the Jordan from where they are. And so these, again, you have these spies going in. Now this time what the spies do is that they enter into Jericho, and we're told that the people of Jericho, and especially the king, had heard about what the Israelites had done, and the deeds that God had done for them. And so he sends soldiers out to try and capture these men. And then we're told that there's this woman in Jericho named Rahab, and she's a prostitute, but she takes these spies in and she hides them at her house. And when the soldiers come and say, hey, have you seen those men? We heard that they were by your house. She goes, oh yeah, they fled the city. You should go chase them. Maybe you can still take them. And she protects these spies. And what she tells them is, I know that Yahweh has given you this land, right? Everybody's heard about what he has done for you all. And so what we see is Rahab acting in faith. She realizes Yahweh, the Lord, he's with this people. He's in charge and he's given them this land. And so she protects them. And you think back to the promise given to Abraham in chapter 12, right? I will bless those who bless you, right? So I'm going to bless those who bless you and your descendants. And so Rahab, in this act of faith towards God and care for his people, basically she cares for them, she hides them, protects them. And then what's going to happen is the people are going to say, the spies will say, hey, when we come into this city, we're not going to touch you or your household. We're going to take you into the people of Israel. We can't take you right now because that would raise alarms and people would say, Rahab, what are you doing? But when we come back, we will protect you. And you get this really cool, again, you have this woman who's a prostitute, right? Not like if you're thinking of like powerful friends, right? Or who should you ally yourself with? Like she doesn't fit the bill, and yet God uses her and her faith to protect his people. And in doing so, she and her family are going to be spared. And again, she heard what they did to Egypt and to the Amorites. And we're told that she lives in the city wall. So again, we talked about fortified cities a bit last week, but the idea that there are cities that have these tall walls built around the outside to protect yourself. You can kind of, like a turtle shell, kind of keep yourself protected. So they would often build houses into that wall as kind of an extra level of defense, protection, and use of space. And so she lives against the wall. So she lets them down through the wall once the soldiers who are looking for them have left. And they give her a scarlet cord to tie on her window. And they say, when we come in, if you stay in your house and you have this cord, we won't touch you or your household. That'll be a sign. And I talked about parallels, right? So we have spies going into the promised land. And now we also have judgment coming upon a sinful place. And what is the means by which somebody is spared from that judgment? It's this scarlet red sign on the house. And you think back to Egypt, right? There was judgment on that 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. And the people of faith, the people of God, were spared by judgment by putting a lamb's blood on their door. This red on their door spared them from judgment. So you start to see these parallels here. And again, you see God's intention too of not just culturally or ethnically one people, but even the fact that Rahab in faith is now being spared from this judgment. She's being welcomed into the people of God, and God is using her to protect and to carry out his plan. So really cool the way this is playing out. Again, the parallels that's happening. And then they come back and they tell the story of what happened and how Rahab protected them. And then we're told at the end of chapter 2 that they say to Joshua, truly Yahweh has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. Now, again, I said parallels, right? Notice the contrast here. You have spies going to the promised land. What's their report? The Lord's given us this land. It's ours, right? He's going to keep his promise. Back in Numbers, what was the report? Oh, we can't do it, right? No, there's no way. And so now we have the people with a more obedient heart and doing what they're supposed to. And so they know the Lord's going to fulfill his promise. And so you see that playing out here in chapter 2. In chapter 3, then you're going to have the people of Israel getting ready to head over. So you have the ark leading them. So the thing in the wilderness, you kind of had these different tribes. You had 6 tribes in front, and then the ark and tabernacle with the Levites in the middle, and then 6 tribes in the back. But now the ark is leading them as a symbol that it is the Lord leading them into this land. They're told to consecrate themselves because tomorrow they're going to cross over, and they have this promise that the Lord will do wonders for them. The Lord says that I'll exalt you, Joshua. So again, just like I showed everybody that Moses was my servant by what I did through him, I'm going to do the same for you. They take 1 man from each of the 12 tribes. So they have 12 men total. And then they have this kind of crossing over the Jordan. So what's really cool is you have these priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, right? So they have it on these poles, they're carrying it. And as soon as their feet touch the water, it forms a heap of water. So if you think about a river, the Jordan River, it's flowing from one side to another. The way that they're crossing, it's flowing from their right to left, from the north to the south. And when they touch the water, all of a sudden the water heaps up and it stops flowing. So all of a sudden everything becomes dry where they're crossing. And so again, parallels, think back to the Red Sea. You have the people entering into a new phase. They're leaving bondage into freedom by crossing over dry land through water. And now you have the people going from the wilderness into the promised land, crossing over on dry land through this river. And so again, there's all of these images, all of these reoccurring pictures that God has given us, and he keeps making these connections for us. He keeps showing us, hey, remember Passover? That's what I'm doing for Rahab. Hey, remember the Exodus? This is like a new Exodus that's taking place right now. And so they're crossing over. Those 12 men each take a stone from the midst of the Jordan. So if you think about it, in a river, you're going to have all sorts of big rocks and small rocks under the water. But since it's dried out now, you can just go up and pick up any of those rocks. So each one takes a rock, and they're going to make a memorial out of these. And so they're going to make a heap and an altar on the other side in the promised land out of these 12 stones. And we're told that way when your kids, future generations ask, hey, what are those stones for? Why is there that little monument? You can tell them that the Lord brought us over on dry land, right? So again, a huge emphasis on teaching your kids, passing the faith on to the next generation, telling about the deeds and the wonders of the Lord, and that we should continue to pass these on from one generation to another. And these memorials, these stones, are a testament for that. We're told that we have about 40,000 men ready for war. So that's the size of the army right there. And that they all stood in awe of Joshua. So again, he is being exalted in front of them. That God is lifting up Joshua as his person to lead them. And then really interestingly, in verse 19 here in chapter 4, we're told this is the 10th day of the first month that they cross over. That might not sound that significant, but that is the night of that God instituted the Passover. When way back in Exodus, I think chapter 12 or 13, he says, hey, this is the first of your months, and on the 10th day you'll take a lamb. So the Feast of the Unleavened Bread would start on the 10th day of the first month. And so now again, this is a new Passover. This is a new Exodus. This is a new all of it. It's just kind of all wrapped up. It's a new year, right? First month of the year, right? It's a new beginning for God's people. That's the picture here. It's freedom, it's victory, it's salvation, all of this wrapped up, just even captured in the dates that we have here. Then we're told that the people in the promised land hear of this, that the water dried up. And apparently they'd already heard about Egypt, right? And they'd heard about the Red Sea. And so now all of a sudden they heard about this water and they realize this is not good for us. They're fearful, their hearts melt. They know that judgment is coming. And then the people of Israel are commanded to circumcise again, because if you think about it, circumcision is this ongoing covenant, this ongoing sign. But we had 40 years in the wilderness where we had to have a generation die off, and apparently they didn't circumcise the next generation. So again, it's saying, hey, we're in the promised land now, but you need to live as my covenant people, so you got to do the covenant sign. So they get circumcised, they heal up, and then the Lord says after the healing that the reproach of Egypt has been rolled away, right? So all of the things of the past are behind you, right? Promised land's ahead of you, you're in it now. We're told that they celebrate the Passover. So again, this is the first Passover they're celebrating in the promised land. This thing that they were expecting for so long. It's just like, wow, we're here. And on top of it, the food they're eating is the fruit of the land. They're eating the fruit of the promised land, this thing that God had been telling them, like land flowing with milk and honey. You're going to eat trees and fruit that you did not plant and from fields you did not sow, and all of this. It's happening. We're in the promised land, and God's fulfilling all of these promises, just like dominoes now. It's like all of these things that God has been setting up for us are just going full stop now. It's just awesome. And we're told then that the manna ceases. So this daily portion of bread that has delivered them through the wilderness is done because it was only meant to hold them over until the final destination. I'm giving you a little bit at a time until we get to the promised land. But hey, you're there. You have the abundance now. You're in the promised land. You don't need that little portion anymore. And I mentioned this with the manna, but I think it's a good picture for in this lifetime. Sometimes it feels like we just get our daily bread. We just get enough for this life, what we need to carry on each day. But one day when the Lord returns, it's going to be just an abundance and a plethora. It's going to be awesome. But manna ceases. That's behind them. And then we're told about this commander of the Lord's army. And it's this seemingly angel. And also he equates himself with the Lord himself. So Joshua is talking to him. He says, are you for us? Are you against us? And he says, that I'm the commander of the army of the Lord. Joshua falls on his face and worships him. And then the commander of the Lord's army says to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy, which is what the Lord said out of the burning bush to Moses back in Exodus 3. So again, the Lord is with his people. The Lord is leading his people. And as we go forward, you'll see times where you'll have the angel of the Lord, this commander of the Lord. It's this messenger, this embodiment of the Lord himself, the servant who's leading them. And so you have, again, just God showing, I'm the one leading you. Who's ultimately, Joshua, yes, you're the head here, but who's ultimately leading the people into the promised land? It's the Lord. And we're going to see that in this book. In a lot of their battles, it's not even the army that does anything or does very little compared to what God is doing, not only through them, but even in supernatural ways. So then in chapter 6, we have the Battle of Jericho. So this is the first part of the conquest. They're in the promised land. So the first target that God has directed them to is the city of Jericho, right? That's where Rahab was, where the spies interacted with her. And God gives them this really unusual method of attacking the city. So we talked about besieging. So normally you'd camp outside the city and just cut off their supplies. We're told that nobody in Jericho goes in or out. So they're in besiegement mode. They're on the defense. And the way that the Lord instructs them to attack the city is that for 6 days they do a lap around the city. They have 7 priests with 7 trumpets blowing. They have the Ark of the Covenant. So they're encircling the city for 6 days, 1 lap per day with the priests, with trumpets, with God's presence in the ark. And then on the 7th day, they do 7 laps, and then the trumpets blast and everyone shouts, and the walls come crumbling down, right? So the walls fall down. This is the Lord doing it. This is the key feature, right? They're not using any sort of military acumen that they developed somewhere. The Lord is the one who is giving them this city. The Lord is the one who's now executing his judgment against the people of Canaan. And so again, you have these numbers that are significant. Think back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. 6 days of creation, and on the 7th, you have this Sabbath. You have this celebration. You have this enjoyment and completion. And now you have around Jericho 6 days of circling once, and then on the 7th day, the city is given to them. And that's what basically Joshua says to the people. He says, the Lord has given you the city. Before the walls even come down, he's already told them, it's like present tense or past tense. The Lord has given you this city, even before it's happened, because it's that sure of his promise. Now they keep their promise to Rahab, so they go and seek her out and they save her and her whole household that's saved. And then we're told that they live in Israel to this day. So she becomes grafted into the people of God, right? Ethnically, not Hebrew, but out of faith, she is brought into God's people. That's a key feature that I want to just keep driving home for us, because as we'll see in the Gospels, people lose that. People fail to see that the people of Israel were always bound by belief more so than by an ethnic connection. Okay? So I just want to keep driving that home as we see that in the Old Testament, something Jesus will point out. And I'll just say this too. Rahab, this foreign woman who's brought in by faith, ends up being part of the lineage of Jesus. So again, really significant here that she is part of this whole situation. And then I'll just close out chapter 6 by highlighting that Joshua, after they burned down the city, so they destroyed the whole city. It's all gone. They're supposed to devote it all to destruction, almost like a sacrifice to the Lord. Joshua then lays a curse before the Lord and says, basically, at the cost of his firstborn shall anyone relay the foundation of Jericho, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up his gates. So he is saying that this city and its judgment should not be rebuilt. And anyone who would seek to, if they're going to lay the foundation of Jericho once again, they're going to lose their firstborn. And anyone who sets up its gates shall lose his youngest son. Now, interestingly, you might wonder, I feel like I've heard of Jericho at other points in the Bible, or I feel like even in Jesus' day or modern day, Jericho's around, isn't it? And the answer is yes. And actually, this is multiple books away, but I wanted to flag it here. Eventually, Jericho will be rebuilt. And we're going to actually see this curse happen, that even though the people knew not to rebuild it, somebody's going to go take it upon themselves to rebuild it. And in doing so is going to, sadly, lose their children. And then in chapter 7, we get our first hiccup for this week's reading. So things are going so well. The people are obedient and they're getting in the promised land and they got their first city. They captured Jericho and defeated it. Well, now we're told that this man named Achan took some of the devoted things, which means that there were items that they were supposed to destroy and burn up, and Achan took them for himself. Out of greed and disobedience, he brings it into his family's tent. So presumably his family would have known about this too, and so they conspired, or he conspired to hide this. But what happens then is they go to fight their next battle with a city called Ai, and they're thinking like, oh man, we just beat Jericho to see how easy that was. And so let's go defeat them. And instead they lose. They end up having to flee and things don't go well. And Joshua's like, Lord, why did you bring us here? Right? I thought we were supposed to be winning. I thought this was supposed to go well. And the Lord tells him it's because there's been a breach of faith. There's been idolatry, right? And basically, how can you stand before your enemies while you have devoted things in your midst? Basically, while you have things that you were supposed to destroy, you were supposed to leave behind, how are you expecting to have success in what I've given to you? Now, an extreme example of this, and I guess modern life would be, if there's idols that we have in our life or besetting sins that we refuse to deal with, they're going to keep us from fully living the life that God has called us to, or loving good works. Maybe that's a bit of a parallel. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but something to think about. But what ends up happening is they take lots. So again, you can think of something random, like almost like they put all the tribes in a hat, right? And pick one out. And they get the tribe of Judah, and then they go within clans, and they keep going smaller and smaller families. So imagine like a big family tree, and every layer down you go, you draw to figure out who it is. And eventually they get to Achan and his family, and he admits to having done this act of idolatry, and he's punished by death for it. And again, that's laid out very clearly in the law. This is something he was warned about. This is something God has been stressing over and over again. And Achan, in his disobedience, he caused not only, a minor inconvenience, but he caused suffering and loss on the part of Israel. And so his punishment for his idolatry and the sin that he brought upon the whole people is ultimately his life and his household. And really sad. And they basically make a heap as kind of, again, a reminder of what happened. So lest anyone else turn from the Lord and his direction, Achan's fate is kind of a reminder to them and a warning to them. But then now that they've dealt with the idolatry, right, now that that's been purged from them, that's common language in the scriptures for dealing with sin and idolatry. It's being purged from the people. The Lord tells Joshua, basically, don't fear. Go back to what you're supposed to do. I'm with you. So they go fight Ai, and basically the Lord has them set up an ambush. So they have a number of people waiting by the city, but are hiding. And then Joshua leads a group that looks like they're attacking the city again. And as soon as the king of Ai sees them, he leads his soldiers out and attacks Joshua. And Joshua and his men pretend to be losing, and they pretend to retreat. So they run away. And Ai is like, go get them. Let's capture them. So they keep chasing after Joshua and his men. And in the meantime, then Joshua gives a signal. And then the ambush, the people who are waiting, go into Ai and burn it up. So there's nobody left to protect the city because they're all fighting Joshua, right? And so there's this ambush that takes place. And then the people of Ai look back at their city and it's up in smoke. And so then they're terrified. They realize, oh my gosh, what's happened? And then the people of Israel ultimately defeat them and win. And we're told that ultimately they hang the king of Ai as kind of, again, executing the judgment against him. But as God said not to leave a hangman on a tree, because a man hung on a tree is a curse, they take him down before evening, and we'll see that play out a couple times. And then here, still in chapter 8, we have the renewing of the covenant. But now we were told about this in Deuteronomy, but you have this scene with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. So these are mountains in the promised land. And so these are the mountains of blessing, Gerizim, and the mountain of curse, which is Ebal. And so they build an altar, they read the covenant, and they take their stations, just like God said. And it's, again, this reminder and this renewal. You see a lot of times these renewal of covenants, this idea of, I think the best way to think about it is like a marriage vow renewal. Like if a couple says, hey, we're obviously still married, but we want to renew our vows, like it's good to once again vocalize and remind ourselves and commit to something. And so we'd like to go through a ceremony to publicly or before one another commit once again, right? Not that we weren't committed, but it's good to keep doing it. It's good to remind ourselves. It's good to continually put our heart in it. You see that play out here. So as they're doing this act with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, they're renewing the covenant with God once again and saying, yep, we will listen to you. Thank you. And the Lord continues to protect them and watch over them and lead them. Then in chapter 9, we have a group called the Gibeonites who are quite interesting. So the Gibeonites hear about all of this and they realize the Lord is with these people. So again, this is an acknowledgement of the Lord's power and who he is. It's hard to say it's an act of faith, but it's certainly an acknowledgement. And they don't want to fight the Israelites. And so they trick the Israelites. Basically what they do is they tatter their clothes and they get these empty and old like wineskins and stuff. And they come to the camp and say, oh, we're from a distant land that we just happen to be wandering in. We're not from around here. Would you please make a covenant of peace with us? And we're told that Joshua and the people of Israel, they don't consult with the Lord and they go, sure, as long as you're not from here, we were told not to make a covenant with any of the people of Canaan, but if you're not from Canaan, then we can make a covenant with you. And so they trick them, and then shortly after they realize that they're now neighbors, and they say, wait a minute, what, you're from here? And the Gibeonites are basically like, we had no choice, but do whatever you see is pleasing to you. So the people of God, they keep their promise. They should have listened to God the first time. They should have inquired of him, but they keep their promise. They're not going to break their covenant of peace with the Gibeonites. But the Gibeonites will serve them. They're going to cut wood and fetch water and help with, I think, wood for the altars, it says. So the Gibeonites, again, they're spared. It's almost, again, you can see that these people acting in fear of the Lord, sometimes in a terrified fear, but in awe of him, their life is ultimately spared, and they're actually incorporated into the life of God's people. In chapter 10, then, we're told about the king of Jerusalem, and that city should set off some bells for us. It's actually not going to take a huge prominence just yet, but it's an important one to flag. And as if you know anything about the modern world too, it still carries a lot of significance. But you have the king of Jerusalem who then gathers 4 other kings. So he hears about all of this. He hears about what happened to Jericho and Ai. And then he hears that Gibeon has now made a peace treaty with the people of Israel. And he's like, man, Gibeon's bigger than Ai. Like if they're scared of them, what are we going to do? I want to highlight this too. At this point, kings are probably not exactly what we think of as kings, in the sense that to be a king did not mean that you had some big, expansive kingdom. A lot of these places, as you can probably pick up on, they're almost like a city-state where like you have Jerusalem and it has within its city its own kind of commerce and army. And so the king of Jerusalem kind of rules over Jerusalem and just kind of its neighboring territory. So sometimes when we think of kingdom, we think of like British kings who have like a vast empire across the world or something. But kings here could be much more localized. Now they can also be much more expansive, and we're going to see kings going forward, including in Israel, that are going to have large swaths of territory. But you'll notice here you're going to have over 30 kings in all, just in the book of Joshua and to Judges. So when you think of king, these aren't necessarily people with huge territories, but sometimes just one city that they're in charge of, that they're the ruler of, almost like a military mayor, you could think of. They're in charge civilly, but they're also the military leader as well, and so they lead their men out into battle. So you have Jerusalem, you have the king of Jerusalem who gathers 4 other kings. They attack Gibeon, kind of like, hey, how could you let these people in and make a peace agreement with them? Gibeon goes to Israel and says, wait, we have a peace agreement with you, come help us. And so Joshua leads the people into battle with these 5 kings and their armies. We're told that the Lord throws them into a panic and then sends a hailstorm. And we're told that the hailstorm kills more men than are killed with the sword. So again, lest you think that they're winning because Joshua is just an amazing military tactician, you see that even in some of these battles, it's the Lord sending hail and sending people into a panic that ultimately does most of the fighting. Then we're told that in order to finish this battle, Joshua calls on the Lord, and he does this really peculiar thing where the sun stops for about a whole day. So you can imagine the sun is making its, we're orbiting or we're rotating the earth, and the sun, if you're looking up at the sky, it's moving over its course, and then it just pauses for about the length of a day so they can keep fighting in the daylight, because especially at this time, you have no electric light. There's no way you can fight in the dark. And so the Lord lets there be light until victory is won. So, the Bible explicitly says here, there's never been a day like this ever since. It's acknowledging this is not a normal thing. This is a supernatural event that's going on. And there's kind of this song about it. We're told that it's in the book of Jashar, which is again one of those books that is referenced, and we can probably conclude that it's a folk, or maybe not even a folk, but like a music book or a song book to help the people remember battles and such. But we don't have it, obviously, and we're not told about it other than that. But it also calls out for us in the Bible just how remarkable it is that the Lord heeded the voice of man, that Joshua asked for more daylight and the Lord stopped the earth, right? Like honestly, that's what prayer can do. Now, that doesn't mean that the Lord's going to do it every time. We see times where the Lord decides not to answer a prayer the way that somebody asked, but at the prayer of Joshua, the Lord literally stopped the rotation of the earth for a day. That's what it's claiming here, and that's pretty just beautiful and remarkable. They eventually find those 5 kings hiding in a cave, so they dealt with the armies, but these kings, who actually were the ones who waged war, kind of cowardly, they let their men die, but then they hide in a cave. They're brought out, they're executed, and then they're ultimately buried in that cave. And then as we continue through chapter 10 into 11, you have some more kind of broad sweeping descriptions of some of this conquest. So you'll notice here at times we're going to zoom in and talk about what this battle looked like at Jericho. And then at times it's just going to say, and they defeated this, they moved here, and so on. And so we're told to defeat the king of Makkedah, and then they moved from Makkedah to Libnah, and Libnah to Lachish, and Lachish to Eglon, and you kind of keep this going here. Again, I'm not expecting you to know all of these places. There's going to be a lot of cities, and one of the difficult things too is a lot of these places go by more than one name. They could have a Canaanite name and then a Hebrew name and so on. I'm going to put the link once again to that knowingthebible.net page with a bunch of maps. And this one in particular, in today's episode, if you look through maps 13, 14, and 15 will be very helpful. But map 13 is the conquest. And so you'll see all of these places listed out there. So if you want to pull up one of those maps as you're reading this or to have nearby, that can be helpful to kind of get a little bit of an idea of the tracking. But the long and short is that they start in kind of the southern part of Canaan. In chapter 11, we're told about some more of these kings that they defeat and some other kings that join forces to fight them, have this huge army, but the Lord still gives victory to his people. And we're told again that they're not to give peace or covenant to anyone except for the Hivites of Gibeon. Those are the one group that they already foolishly made a covenant with. So they aren't to make peace with anyone else. We're actually told here in chapter 11, verse 20, that this was the Lord's doing to harden these kings' hearts to battle. So once again, I know this is a tough one to wrestle with, but we see that the Lord has executed his judgment against Canaan to the point where he's saying it's too late. I've given you generations to repent and to turn from this evil. I'm not letting you stop now. So these kings, they are hardened and their hearts are stubborn to fight, even though they're going to be defeated. In chapter 11, verse 21, too, then we're told that Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. So if you remember, when the spies went into the promised land back in Numbers, what was the reason why they thought they were so afraid? They were afraid of these fortified cities, which we've seen the Lord, first chance he gets to in Jericho, he just tears down the walls of a city, right? Oh, we can't take this city because they have these big walls. And the first city they come to, the Lord's like, look, I can take down the walls of a city. And also, we were told about these Anakim. These are these giants, right? And again, we can go back into the history behind them, but these were giant, large men. These kind of freakishly large and powerful men that were intimidating and terrifying, but we're told here that they cut them off, that they killed them from the hill country. And so, again, these people they were afraid of. There's no way we can defeat these giants. Now we see in Joshua, when they actually listen to the Lord in faith, they defeat the giants. They defeat these large men. And we're told that only a handful are left. There's only a remnant of them that's left in, I think, Gath, which is going to come back later because that is where Goliath is going to come from. So just flagging that for you right now. But only in Gath and Ashdod do some Anakim remain. And then finally, we're told that Joshua gave this land as an inheritance and that the land had rest from war. So now you have a little bit of a reprieve. So we've been kind of in fighting mode. We've been in conquest. Now you can kind of take a breath. The land has rest, which moves us into chapter 12, which is really just a recap. So it's kind of like we've done a bunch of conquests. We kind of ran through a bunch of things. Now let's take a step back and recount some of what just happened. So we start off with a section of all of the kings that were defeated under the reign or the leadership of Moses. So that would be like Og and such, and Sihon. And then the kings defeated under Joshua, and then we're told that in all that was 31 kings. So again, you can see one army with the Lord as its king and Joshua as its leader has now defeated 31 different kings and their armies. So again, just the overwhelming success that God is giving to his people in carrying out this divine mandate that they've been given. And then again, as we're kind of taking this break from the action, we're kind of taking a picture of like where things stand now. So we're told that Joshua is now old and advanced in years, so he's getting older, and that he doesn't have much time left, but there's still some land that remains to be taken. But we're going to kind of assess where people are. So we're told that there's still some Canaanites that are still around, so they haven't finished the job yet. That's important. That's going to, even in this week's readings, come into play. We're told that the Philistines are still there. That's going to be an important one to flag for later. You have other groups like the Sidonians, etc. We're told then that we get into this tribal allotment. So again, we're starting to piece together where the different tribes of Israel are going to be living. And so we start off by talking about those on the east side. So again, this is Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, who when they were over on the other side of the Jordan said, hey, this is really good pasture land for our livestock. Could we live here? So we're told that they're going to have that territory, and we get kind of a picture of it. And again, this is where map number 14 on that website is a good picture if you just kind of want to see where the tribes all end up. I don't expect you to remember all these cities. There's a lot, but read through them and see if any sound familiar. Like, wait, I feel like I've heard of a story that involves that, or just make sure you hear them or read them once, because sometimes these cities and these places will pop up again. But we're told of this land, right? So the places and the different territories of Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh. Then we're told that, again, the Levites don't have a territory because their inheritance is the Lord. They're the tabernacle workers. They don't have their own tribal allotment. Then in chapter 14, we get to the west side tribes. So this is the other 9.5 tribes and where they're going to be in the promised land. But before we get into the specifics there, we're told about Caleb's request. So if you remember Caleb, when he was 40, he was one of those spies who went into the promised land in Numbers, but he came back along with Joshua and said, no, the Lord's going to give us this land. And he brought back a good report. And so part of the promise he got is you're going to get the land that your foot stepped on. The places that you stood, when you came back, you wholly believed in the Lord. And so Joshua and the Lord honor this inheritance, this request. They give him this land of Hebron as kind of his inheritance in the promised land. Then in chapter 15, we're going to start going down all the different groups. So first we have Judah, which again, I'll just go back to Jacob's blessing, Moses' blessing. Judah has such a prominent place. So Judah's the first one to get an allotment, and it's going to have this big southern part. And again, you can look at a map for this, but it's the southernmost part of the promised land, and it's a wide swath territory. In that area, you have Jerusalem. Again, that's going to come significant later, but I just want to highlight it for it. As you read through this and you read these cities, you're going to notice like, oh, okay, so Jerusalem, they're in that area in Judah. And then we're told about Caleb again. And so he had been given Hebron. And then at one point he's leading a group against Debir. And he says that whoever captures the city can have my daughter as a wife. And we're told that Othniel is ultimately the one who does it. And so Caleb gives him his daughter as a wife. And then his daughter also asks if they can have a field and some springs. And so you're seeing even here as this is playing out, the book of Joshua is trying to help an Israelite leader to understand how things got to the way they were. Just like Genesis for us kind of gave us a picture of how the world is as it is, how these different people groups got to their locations, how creatures are the way they are. The book of Joshua, as they're settling the promised land, it's telling you, oh, it's because of this thing that this clan has these wells, right? That Caleb gave these to his daughter, and so on. Again, we have then a list of towns for Judah. So again, all of these, they're going to have a list of all of the towns and villages that they receive as part of their territory. We are told that the Jebusites will continue to dwell with them for a little bit, and the Jebusites are the ones in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's not all cleared out yet, but it's within that territory. And then in chapter 16, we have Ephraim getting the next allotment. And I've mentioned this before, but going forward in the southern part of the territory, Judah is the big player. And in the northern part, Ephraim is the big player. Ephraim being a son of Joseph, who was given the firstborn blessing by Jacob. And that goes back to Genesis when Jacob crosses his arms to put his right hand on Ephraim and says he'll be greater than Manasseh. We're going to see that play out here. So Ephraim gets its territory, all based on this blessing. Again, they're a large, numerous people. Again, we're told that there's still some Canaanites there, but Ephraim gets its territory. Then Manasseh, so as another child of Joseph, it gets the next allotment. And then in chapter 17, we get a little bit of a background of places like Gilead. So Gilead, we're told, is actually a grandson of Manasseh. And so we see territories and cities sometimes named after key figures in genealogies and lineages. What's confusing is the first time Gilead shows up in the Bible as a territory, we're not told that it's named after an Israelite, right? We're not told that it's named after Manasseh's grandson. So this is sometimes where having a commentary, this is what I'm trying to help too, is give some context for this. So sometimes when you're reading about a city, it's said, it'll go by a name, and that name might not be the name that it was actually used at the time the story's taking place. It might be the name that it gets later, as is the case with Gilead. We're told here that after Manasseh kind of settles that, it gets named after this Manassehite Gilead. And then still in chapter 17, we have those daughters of Zelophehad. Again, he was the one who had those daughters but no sons, and so they get their allotment. And it's recalling, they come to Joshua and Eleazar, kind of the new Moses and Aaron, say, hey, Moses promised us this, and Joshua and Eleazar keep that promise. Just a reminder that Eleazar, as the high priest, would have been a big part of this allotment process. You have Joshua and Eleazar kind of helping distribute this land to all of the different people. And then the people of Joseph, so again, think Ephraim and Manasseh, they come and basically say, hey, we're too numerous for the territory. You didn't give us a big enough chunk of land. And so we're told that they can go take this kind of foresty hill country. We're told there's Perizzites and Rephaim there, but the Lord's with you. Clear out the trees there and dwell there. And so, again, you see just how large, especially Ephraim is. Because of the blessing that goes way back to Genesis, they have so much territory that they need a bigger swath of land. So again, Judah, huge chunk. Ephraim, huge chunk as well. Then in chapter 18, we're told that they pitched the tent of meeting at Shiloh. So this is one of the cities that's important to keep tabs on for a little bit. Shiloh is going to be the place where the tabernacle is going to live for a while. So we were told that the Lord's going to make his name dwell somewhere. For right now, that's in Shiloh. Okay, so a lot of things are going to kind of revolve around Shiloh for a little bit. We're told that the land laid subdued before them. And so again, we talked about parallels, right? What was the original command and mandate to Adam and Eve in Genesis, way back at creation, right? Part of it was to have dominion over the earth. And so now you have the people of Israel moving into the promised land, and the land laid subdued before them. They're exercising dominion over it. And so again, the promised land is meant to be this picture of life done right. Like when the people of Israel get to the promised land and live in it as they're supposed to, it's supposed to be this picture, you could say, of heaven on earth, of the world as it was meant to be. And so there's kind of this subduing, this dominion that is taking place in the promised land here. We're told that Joshua then tells them to kind of get to it, the other 7 tribes, like there's still more to be done in terms of taking the land. They take 3 men from every tribe and they go scout out and describe the remaining land. So again, you think of sending spies. Hey, this land's kind of like this. There's kind of some water here. There's this many cities over here. And then they cast lots. So again, think of rolling dice or drawing out of a hat or probably something to do with asking these sacred stones, the Urim and Thummim. But whatever it was, they did some sort of kind of random process to allow God to lead them to a decision. And then we're given the picture of all these different places. So you have Benjamin, who's in between Judah and Joseph. So in between Judah and then Ephraim and Manasseh. Simeon is in the midst of Judah because Judah has such a large territory, they can't actually fill it all. And again, I'll just highlight, way back in the blessings given in the end of Genesis, Jacob said that Simeon and Levi would have no portion, they'd be scattered in the promised land because of their character. And so now Levi has no portion because he's the tabernacle worker, and Simeon is kind of scattered amongst Judah within Judah's borders. And so they don't have kind of their own distinct, clear territory. And so again, you see those kind of promises coming back to roost here. And then you go through the other brothers. Again, kind of go through all of it, and you get all of the different tribes and where they're going. And again, I just look at the maps if you want to kind of get a picture of what that looked like exactly. Chapter 20, you have the reference to the cities of refuge. So again, we were told that there's going to be these 6 cities that you go to if you accidentally commit manslaughter and you want to get your case heard in front of a council before you're put to death. And again, if you did not intentionally kill somebody, then you would not be killed. And you could live in that city until the death of the high priest, in which you could go home. So now we actually have all the cities. We actually have the territory, so we can actually identify what those cities of refuge are, all of these Levitical cities. Which brings us to chapter 21, where the Levites then come and basically say, hey, we were told that we would get some cities in pasture land. So they're not going to get a full territory, like tribe of Levi, here's our chunk, but rather they're going to have cities throughout. So they can kind of minister and care for the people throughout the whole territory. I don't know, you could almost think of it as like your local parish pastors all throughout the cities and territory. And then you have the central place where the tabernacle is. That kind of is the center of the worship life. And so they received those by lots and amongst all the different groups. And then in chapter 22, you have the eastern tribes basically being told by Joshua, hey, you did what you're supposed to do. Thanks for fighting for your brothers. You guys can go back home, right? Go back to the east side, back to the plains of Moab and so on. Go back to your territory, Reuben and Gad and Manasseh. And then you have this really interesting case of miscommunication. And there's something about the story that I just love because I've seen this play out in life so many times. So here's what happened. So Manasseh, the half tribe of Manasseh, Gad and Reuben, they're heading back. When they get to the Jordan, they're about to cross over. They're about to leave the promised land and go back to their territories where their wives and kids are, back on the east side of the Jordan River. And they set up this altar. And the people hear about this, right? You set up this altar on the west side of the Jordan, and they assume that you've broken faith, that you're now offering sacrifices wrongfully. Because, right, the sacrifices are meant to be offered now it's in Shiloh, the tent of meeting. That is the place of sacrifice. You need to have priests offering those sacrifices. Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, you have no business creating an altar like that and offering sacrifices. Clearly now you're breaking faith, you're breaking the commandments, you've left the Lord, you've left Yahweh. So this is what's so crazy. After all of this, the western side, the 9.5 tribes on the west side, prepare for war against the 2.5 tribes on the east side. And they're ready to go fight them. And when they come and they say, basically, what are you doing here, right? You've broken faith. Didn't we suffer enough at Peor, right? That was the case when Balaam convinced the women to seduce Israelites to go worship their gods. Didn't we suffer enough when Achan, right? That was earlier in the book of Joshua when he had those devoted things. Why are you doing this? And then the east side tribes, they say, no. Here's what we were thinking. What's going to happen is generations from now, your children are going to look at our children and say, hey, you're not in the promised land. You have no portion. You don't belong to this. And they're going to exclude us from the company and the assembly of God. So we set up this altar as a replica and as a witness to the fact that we are part of this, that we are also part of the people of God devoted to Yahweh. So the eastern side groups, these tribes had built this as a reminder that we're part of this. The western side, having no context for this, saw it as a breach of idolatry and a breach of faith and saying, wait a minute, you've left the Lord. And it completely miscommunication, and praise the Lord that they talk about it before they get to battle. And ultimately the west side group says, all right, this is good. And clearly the Lord is in our midst, that he kind of carried us through this and watched over us. So I think it's interesting because there's a lot of times in life where you see something and you assume, oh, they did this because X, Y, and Z. And you just put your intentions on them. Here's why they did that. And sometimes it's like, no, actually it was a really noble intention. You just didn't know what it was. And you see that kind of playing out here. In chapter 23 then, so now Joshua is old and he's spurring them on. He's telling them you have to keep going, keep taking the land, keep the law that Moses gave. So again, remember these commandments, remember the word that he's given to you. Don't turn back and cling to the remnant of the people. So there's still some Canaanites to be driven out. Don't turn back from what the Lord has given you to do and start clinging to them. Don't intermarry with them lest they become a thorn in your side again and a stumbling block to you. And if you do this, God will stop driving them out. If you don't finish this job, if you don't finish completing the conquest that I've given you to do, then the Lord's going to stop delivering victory, and you're going to now have to deal with these people that you've left there. And then in the last chapter of Joshua, again, it's crazy. We went through the whole book this week. The last chapter of Joshua, they gather at a town called Shechem, a city called Shechem, and they renew the covenant again. So again, they're recalling what the Lord did. The Lord, now they have more to, right? So they've seen him deliver from Egypt. Now they've seen the Lord give them the promised land. This generations old promise, hundreds and hundreds of years old, has been fulfilled. They've seen the Lord's faithfulness. They're renewing their commitment and their vows to him. Yep, we will do this. The Lord gave us this land. He stresses, I love this, that I've given you a land that you have not labored for, right? Trees that you have not planted. And again, it's a good picture that God's grace is like, there's things that I'm giving you that you didn't do anything to deserve, right? You didn't even plant those fruit trees, and you're eating that fruit right now, right? Just like the gospel at its heart is Jesus is the one who labored to win victory and salvation and forgiveness, and you just get to eat and reap the fruits of it because of his graciousness and God's infinite mercy. So that I love that. This command here then again, so put away the gods that your father served beyond the river and in Egypt. So again, put away means don't even think of taking up these gods again that your father served beyond the river. That's hearkening back to where Abraham was called from, way out east. So before Abraham was called by Yahweh to come and follow him in this covenant, you have ancestors who worshipped other gods. And then in Egypt, you're surrounded by Egyptian gods, and some of you and your ancestors worshipped those gods there. None of that, right? You know that there is no God but Yahweh. There's no God but the Lord. He is the one. Serve him and serve him alone. The people say, yes, we will serve him. And they write this all down, and they kind of go back to their allotments now. They're kind of going home. We're told that Joshua dies, right? And that the people will serve the Lord all of Joshua's life and the life of all of the elders that outlived Joshua. So of that generation of its leaders, as long as they're alive, Israel is true in heart to this covenant and to these promises. And then we get this awesome reference to the end of Genesis and in Exodus when Joseph, when he was in Egypt, made his brothers promise, when you leave Egypt, take my bones with you. And now we're told that they buried Joseph's bones in Shechem, in this field or this place where Jacob had bought this field way back in Genesis 33. So way back before Jacob or his kids ever went down to Egypt, Jacob had bought this chunk of land in Shechem, and now Joseph's bones are being buried there. So again, you can just see all of these kind of through lines being kind of tied together nicely into this beautiful bow. And then the book of Joshua ends with telling us that Eleazar dies as well. So the high priest Eleazar dies. So you can almost think of it like this. You have Exodus through Deuteronomy. You have Moses as kind of the leader and the prophet. And you have Aaron as the high priest. Then in Joshua, you have Joshua as the leader and the prophet. And you have Eleazar as the high priest. And now we're in the promised land. Both of those two sets have served their purpose. And now we're going to live life in this promised land, which is going to get us to the book of Judges. And this week, you only have one day of reading for the book of Judges, the first 3 chapters. And I'm just going to warn you right now, the book of Judges is not a pretty picture. So one thing I hope that you've come to see is that every time God does something incredible in the Bible, usually there's like a moment of celebration and things are good. And then sin rears its ugly head. So God has delivered the people. He's fulfilled his promises that we were getting way back in Genesis. Now they're in the promised land. It's so good. We're eating fruit that we didn't plant, and we're eating from fields that we did not sow, and we have houses that we did not build, and it's so good. And then the book of Judges comes, and it goes downhill. And what you're going to see here is a spiral. It's a kind of a cycle, but it's a downward spiral of life in the promised land. So what we open up with in the book of Judges is that Joshua is now dead. So the people inquire of the Lord, what should we do next? Basically, God sends Judah and Simeon to go fight. They fight with this king, Adonai-Bezek. And so they defeat him. There's some poetic justice because apparently he's had all sorts of other kings without a thumb or toe serve at his table. And then they do that to him. We have this retelling of the situation with Caleb's daughter being given in marriage. So again, sometimes we'll have these recounting of stories again. We're told that the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, part of the people, that's Jethro. So kind of a cool, again, picture of this priest of Midian who is a foreigner because of his faith and hearing what the Lord had done in Egypt for Moses, then comes to faith and follows alongside too. So his family, his descendants are now part of the people. We're told that the Israelites strike Jerusalem and kind of win a battle, but the Jebusites continue to live there. Those are the people living in Jerusalem. So we've had a bit of a victory, but they have not driven out the inhabitants yet. And so that'll come into play later when they'll eventually take it under King David. We're given this story of this man from Bethel. They're going to go attack Bethel, and this man is coming out. They ask him basically how to get in, and his family is spared. And we're told kind of a funny little story. It's not a huge deal, but it's kind of fun. Because again, it shows that when people respond in faith, like this man tells the Israelites how to attack the city, his family is spared for it, and he's brought into the people of Israel. It's also funny because we're told that the town was called Luz, became Bethel, but then he founds another city called Luz. And so I just love it. It's almost like those immigrants who came from like Orleans, who then found New Orleans, right? Or New York and so on. So he's kind of resettles a new town and names it after his own town. But then at the end of chapter 1, this is what's really important here. We're told that the people of God fail to finish the conquest. They kind of give up. I guess the best way to take this is probably they get comfortable. Like they have a little bit of space. We had some houses. And so instead of finishing the job, they become complacent and they don't finish driving out all the inhabitants. And so the Lord says, you didn't do this. So in chapter 2, the angel of the Lord, this messenger of the Lord, tells them, you didn't drive them all out, so now I'm not driving them out. This is what he promised. If you're not going to finish this, then they're going to be a thorn in your side. I'm going to leave them there. And so this is key to understand because going forward, especially in the next couple books, you have these different groups of Canaanites who are going to be thorns in the sides of the people of God. They're going to cause all sorts of problems. They're going to wage war with them. They're going to attack them. They're going to lead them to idolatry. And so this is part of the consequence of the people not fulfilling the Lord's word and what he commanded them to do. In verse 10, then in chapter 2, we revisit Joshua's death because this is really setting up the sequence in the book of Judges. So we're once again told about Joshua dying and that the people of Israel obey the Lord as long as Joshua was alive and the elders of his generation. But then a generation comes up that did not know the Lord or the works that he had done. So this is reminiscent of a couple things. First off, this is reminiscent of Pharaoh when Pharaoh arises and does not know Joseph or what he had done for Egypt, right? So Joseph had done all of these good things for Egypt, and then a new Pharaoh arises and he doesn't know about those things, so he subjects them to slavery. The other thing, though, that this should call to mind, the second key thing is it begs the question, how in the world does a generation grow up not knowing the Lord or what he's done? If we go back to all of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua, so much attention was given to, you celebrate this holiday so you can tell your children, the Lord did this for us. Hey, let me teach you a song so you can sing about how the Lord delivered us. There's so much attention giving to passing on the faith to the next generation. And then as soon as they get to the promised land, they get comfortable. They like this life. It's good and fruitful, woohoo. And apparently they completely drop the ball in passing the faith on to the next generation. And the next generation doesn't know the Lord and doesn't know what he did. Now, is that all in the parents? Could it be some rebellious generation too? Who knows? We're not told exactly, but you see the generational baton here is seriously dropped. And I think if there's a lot of things to take away from the book of Judges, but as you go forward, I just want to encourage you to notice this. There is a huge emphasis from generation to generation on passing on the faith of the Lord. It is central to every believer's life that they tell the stories. They tell what the Lord has done. They teach the faith to the next generation. And what we see in the book of Judges is a colossal failure over and over again to pass that on to a new generation. Sometimes it seems like that's on the fault of the younger generation because they didn't see it with their own eyes. They just don't believe it. It could very well be on the fault of the older generation for not doing a good job instructing. But it's not just some people's job. It's everybody's job to pass this faith on to the next generation. And you see that in Judges. They botch this. They don't know the Lord or his work. And so this generation grows up in the promised land, but they don't know Yahweh. Who's Yahweh, right? So what do? They serve other gods. Like, we're barely in the promised land, right? We just got settled. Next generation, we're serving other gods. So we're told they serve the Baals, which Baal is a specific Canaanite god, but Baals is also a generic term for the gods of the Canaanites. Baal means Lord. So the lords, the gods of the Canaanites. We're told about these Ashtaroths. Again, that's a female goddess of the Canaanites. So they're worshiping all these other gods all of a sudden. And then we're told then that because of this, right, the Lord fulfills his promise. Because of their idolatry, we're told the Lord gives them over to plunderers, and he sold them to these neighboring nations. So again, the Lord specifically said, I purchased you from Egypt, right? You can almost think of like he bought their freedom. They were slaves, and the Lord, by his mercy, bought them their freedom that they might belong to him and be his people, right? And now it's this picture of like, all right, if you're going to go into idolatry, if you're going to serve other gods, then I'm going to sell you into the hands of another. And so in the book of Judges, here's the cycle that you're going to see play over and over and over again. What happens is the people go into idolatry. The people of Israel worship other gods. They turn away from Yahweh. They turn away from the Lord. Because of that, the Lord is going to allow other nations, other rulers to come and put heavy burdens on them, much like in Egypt, to kind of enslave them, rule over them, exact taxes from them, so on. The people will cry out in their burden, just like they did in Egypt. The Lord will have mercy and compassion on them, and he'll send a judge, just like he sent Moses. He'll send a judge over them to save them, to deliver them. So this judge will, military-wise, will fight for them, will lead them. And then that generation with that judge, the people will be faithful all the days of that judge's life. And then when that judge dies, the next generation will turn back to idolatry. And then the Lord will hand them over to another nation, and then they'll cry out for help, and the Lord will have compassion and mercy. He'll raise up a judge. The judge will save them. And it's going to keep going over and over and over again. It's a cycle, but we're told that each generation is more corrupt. So it's a downward spiral. And you're going to notice this. I'm going to tell you right now, as you go through the book of Judges, the judges are going to get, I'll say, less and less redeemable. They become more and more flawed, and the things that the God's people are doing are going to become more and more atrocious. I mean, just as a forewarning, by the end of the book of Judges, a couple of the most horrendous stories in the Bible are going to take place, because that's just how bad things are when people turn away from the Lord. When people do what is right in their own eyes, what they want to do, when they serve their own gods or the gods of other nations, atrocities end up happening. And through it all, the Lord, again, he hears them when they cry out, but we're going to see this really spiral fast. And then as we close out this week's reading in Judges chapter 3, we get a little bit of a roundup of who are these Canaanite groups that are left, like the Philistines, like the Jebusites. And then we're told, again, here's where things just start to go downhill. We're told that they start taking these Canaanite women for their wives and giving their daughters in marriage. And so they're intermarrying, which was clearly prohibited. The Lord, you can marry people who are not ethnically Israelites. Like we just saw this with some different key figures, but they were explicitly told of these Canaanite groups, you don't do this, okay? The Lord has commanded them not to, because they're going to lead them into idolatry, just like Beth Peor, right? You're going to see this play out over and over again. And so right away then in chapter 3, verse 7, we're told that the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, right? So they start disobeying him. They do evil. They forgot the Lord their God. They forgot Yahweh their God and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. And therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. So you have the first case where the people are now subjected to a foreign power, right? And a power of another people. This king of Mesopotamia who oppresses them for 8 years. So again, this is not a short period of time. Imagine the last 8 years of your life where you were 8 years ago. And all that time, if you were under foreign occupation, that's what they're going through. But again, they cry out to the Lord, and he has mercy. He raises up Othniel. This is actually Caleb's nephew. We talked about him before. He's the one who received Caleb's daughter. And so he goes and leads the people to victory. They're freed from the king of Mesopotamia, and then they have 40 years of rest. So again, he leads them to victory, and then there's rest. But then he dies. They forget about the Lord. They go back to doing what's evil in the sight of the Lord. So then the Lord gives them into the hand of Eglon, king of Moab, who rounds up with him the Ammonites and the Amalekites. So here again, notice you have some figures that we've talked about before: Amalekites, Ammonites, Moabites. Now they're oppressing the people for 18 years. So again, this is 18 years. I mean, that's a huge chunk of time that they're under foreign occupation. Again, the whole point of the promised land is you're going to be free. Nobody's going to rule over you as long as you listen to me. But nevertheless, they turn from the Lord, so he allows the king of Moab to rule over them. But then he eventually hears their cry, and he raises up Ehud, who's a Benjaminite. He's also a lefty, which I think is a funny little detail to include. And then we're told of the way that Ehud delivers the people. He goes to Eglon, king of Moab, and basically says that he has a secret message for him. And he's basically hidden like a small dagger, like a small sword on his person. And then he goes up and says he has to whisper to the king. All the other attendants leave the room, and then he stabs him. And kind of a very graphic scene. And then he sneaks out while everyone's kind of waiting to see if the king's relieving himself or something. When Ehud gets back to the people of Israel, he blows a trumpet and they fight the Moabites. They win victory and they're free again, this time for 80 years. So again, we're going to pass a lot of time here. We're going to have these gaps of time that are going to go very quickly. They're just kind of mentioned, 80 years. But we see that play out. Ehud leads them 80 years. And then at the end of chapter 3, we get a very short little sentence telling us that there was another judge named Shamgar who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad and also saved Israel. So as we go forward, we're going to have more judges. We're going to have more idolatry. We're going to have more of a downward spiral. And so it's an interesting book. It's got some graphic stories. It's got some memorable stories. But it is also a great picture of what happens when God's people don't listen to the Lord, both in terms of the gods they worship, but then what kind of life that leads them to, I think is very important. And we're going to see that play out. As we close out today, I wanted to field a question. And that question was, who are the saints that the Psalms are referring to? Okay, so far in the Psalms, we've had a few different references to the saints or his saints. So for instance, in Psalm 16, verse 3, we have, "As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones in whom is all my delight." Psalm 30 says, "Sing praises to the Lord, O you his saints, and give thanks to his holy name." Psalm 31:23, "Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful." Psalm 34:9, "O fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack." And so on. There's more, I think Psalm 37, and in the future, Psalm 85, 97, 116. So it's a good question because typically when people use the word saints today, we often are referring to those who have died. So in the Roman Catholic Church, people are sainted if they meet a certain criteria. We'll often refer to former Christians as Saint Peter, Saint Paul, right? But obviously, in these passages, it seems a little weird because it'd be weird to say, as for the saints in the land, referring to those who have died, or sing praises to the Lord, O you his saints, right? It seems like it's a present tense thing. And so what we see here is that when the Psalms or the scriptures refer to the saints, it's not always referring to those who have deceased. But more broadly, the saints are God's people. So this is where I have no problem telling a believer today, if their name was Joe, hey, you're Saint Joe, okay? You are a saint. This is the whole sinner and saint idea, that it's not just that you become a saint in the life to come, but that here and now in Jesus Christ, you are a saint. So for instance, the word saints that you see in those Psalms, they come from two different words. One from the word kadash, which means holy. So one way to think about saints are holy ones. And the other coming from the word chesed, which means loving kindness, usually how it's translated. So those who have a loving kindness towards God. So holy and loving to him, pious, devout, that kind of idea. So again, thinking in terms of those who God has redeemed and washed, that in him we are holy, in Jesus we are now saints. Okay? Now, obviously, if you are part of a church that practices All Saints Day, typically on that day we remember specifically saints who have departed this life into the life to come. They have died and now are at peace and rest with the Lord. And so, in a certain sense, there is this idea that we kind of once and for all bestow that title kind of in finality once somebody has kind of finished the course of this life. But it's a present reality too. And that's where people will talk this way too. Sometimes they'll say, I've been called to serve the saints at, Trinity Church, whatever it is. So one way to refer to the people of God is the saints, right? The saints I'm the pastor at Renewal Church. The saints of Renewal Church gathered together to do X, Y, or Z. And so when you hear that word in the scriptures, the saints, you can think of it as the people of God. And then sometimes it will refer to people in the past. So the saints of old, or the saints who have come before us, or all the saints, but it just as much applies to the present tense saints living now. All of those who believe on the Lord Jesus and are holy and loved in him. Hope that helps. Just a reminder, if you want to submit a question, you can email us at podcast@renewaldenver.org or go to renewaldenver.org/Bible in a year, and there is a form there that you can submit questions. We've got a couple more trickling in. I love to see that. So please send in anything that comes to mind. I would love to try and help out. And if you want to follow up, please feel free to reach out as well. But with that, I'm going to send you on your way, and I wish you the best. And as always, may the word of Jesus renew you day by day until life everlasting. Happy reading.